This is an extraordinary period for America's economy. Over the past few weeks, many Americans have felt anxiety about their finances and their future. I understand their worry and their frustration. We've seen triple-digit swings in the stock market. Major financial institutions have teetered on the edge of collapse, and some have failed. As uncertainty has grown, many banks have restricted lending. Credit markets have frozen, and families and businesses have found it harder to borrow money. We are in the midst of a serious financial crisis, and the federal government is responding with decisive action.
That was a financial earthquake felt around the world. It was a financial shock which we hadn't experienced, or the world hadn't experienced, since the 1930s. 2008 and 2009, the world deleveraged in a very major way, and leveraging up does wonderful things while it's going on, and leveraging down is not as much fun.
I know many Americans have questions tonight. How did we reach this point in our economy? How will the solution I propose work? And what does this mean for your financial future? These are good questions, and they deserve clear answers.
Lehman Brothers has filed for bankruptcy, and Bank of America is taking over Merrill Lynch in a $50 billion deal.
Two of the biggest firms on Wall Street are no more. They're kaput this morning.
Open the darn Fed window. He has no idea how bad it is out there. He has no idea. He has no idea.
Kramer.
I have talked to the heads of almost every single one of these firms in the last 72 hours, and he has no idea what it's like out there. None! My people have been in this game for 25 years, and they are losing their jobs, and these firms are going to go out of business, and he's nuts! They're nuts! They know nothing!
The 2008 financial crisis was a sudden collapse of the housing market bubble and resulted in millions of dollars being lost along with millions of people's jobs. It began in 2006 when there was an increasing rate of mortgage defaults. People couldn't pay their mortgages, and as a result, the banks lost other people's money that was stored there. The federal government began to bail out the banks, but the stock market crashed regardless. Millions of lives were lost because of the banks giving out bad mortgages.
I was working in mortgages for Chase Manhattan Bank at the time, lending money for people that wanted to buy homes. 2007, the stock market was doing fairly well. It was around 14,000, and then within a 2-year time period, it lost 54% of its value to 6,000 and change. $11 trillion was lost during that time frame. There was a lot of people that lost their jobs, including me. A lot of people were affected. Over 1 million people were in foreclosures. So a lot of people were affected, and it did have an effect on the economy in America. Have we learned from our mistakes? Yeah, I do think there's more government regulation and overseeing lending practices. The banks got bailed out. In hindsight, it was a good decision, but at that time, it was the philosophy was these large institutions are too big to fail. That if these large institutions fail, it will have a major effect on the economy.
The United States housing bubble was a real estate bubble affecting over half the U.S. states. Housing prices peaked in early 2006, started to decrease in 2006 and 2007, and received new loans in 2012. On December 30th, 2008, the Case-Shiller Home Price Index reported its largest stock price drop in history. On January 1st, 2008, in response to a struggling housing market, the Federal Market Open Committee lowered the federal rate to 3.5% on January 22nd, 2008, then to 3% a week later. A 30-year conventional loan was reduced to 5.76%, compared to 6.22% in 2007. This ended up not actually helping the millions of homeowners who had adjustable rate mortgages that had just reset. They faced much higher monthly payments and they couldn't sell their homes because home prices were falling constantly. On March 7, 2008, the federal government announced that its Term Auction Facility program would release $50 billion on March 10th and again on March 24th. In 2008, the government spent nearly $200 billion to bail out Fannie and Freddie Mac, two government-sponsored enterprises, or GSEs, and it was known as the start of the 2008 financial crisis. During the end of September 2008, Washington Mutual Bank went bankrupt when its panicked depositors withdrew $16.7 billion in just 10 days. Then a few days later, the House of Representatives rejected the proposal to bail out and send the Dow Jones Industrial Average down 770 points. It was the most in any single day in history, and it didn't stop there. Global markets panicked when the MSCI World Index dropping 6% in one day, the most since its creation in the 1970s. At the same time, the London FTSE dropped 15%. However, gold soared over $900 an ounce and oil dropped to just $95 a barrel. In early October of 2008, Congress finally passes the bailout bill, but despite this, 3 days later, stock markets around the world plummeted. In November of 2008, all throughout November, the federal government performed a series of bailouts, guaranteeing loans by the FDIC, and cash infusions into businesses. In December 16, 2008, the Federal Open Market Committee dramatically lowered the federal fund rate between 0.25% and 0%, the lowest rate in its history. It also lowered the discount rate to just 0.5%. With that, the federal government couldn't lower rates any further.
It would remove the risk posed by their troubled assets, including mortgage-backed securities now clogging the financial system. This would free banks to resume the flow of credit to American families and businesses. Any rescue plan should also be designed to ensure that taxpayers are protected. It should welcome the participation of financial institutions, large and small. It should make certain that failed executives do not receive a windfall from your tax dollars. It should establish a bipartisan board to oversee the plan's implementation, and it should be enacted as soon as possible.
Continuing in December 19, 2008, the Treasury inserted $105 billion into TARP funds into 8 banks in return for the preferred stock. TARP refers to the Troubled Asset Release Fund. The government would receive a 5% dividend, increasing to 9% over time. But because of this, most banks bought the government out as soon as the crisis was over. Taxpayers actually made a profit on that deal. On this day, GM, Chrysler, and Ford also asked for $34 billion bailout. In January of 2009, they got $24.9 billion. GM and Chrysler needed it, but Ford, they really didn't need it. But without this bailout, 3 million jobs could have been lost. This is what all the money was riding on.
I believe there will always be greed, and there will be companies out there that will try to make a buck at any cost. Have they learned from their mistakes? I guess Americans or our economy has learned from the recession, but will there be products out there strictly for a profit motive? Yeah, I think that there will always be a case for that, and greed will persuade people to do things that perhaps are unethical and
The main takeaway from this is that the housing bubble bursting was a catalyst for the recession, but the government did a horrible job at managing it and then reversing it. First, they lowered the interest rates on long-term loans and back-to-back loans, which only raised the monthly payments for homeowners. Then, they lowered it again, making the dollar even worse in its value. Congress is also to blame for the U.S. stock market crashing, as it rejected the proposed bailout, and then 3 days later it collapsed, resulting in Congress then passing the same bailout in reaction. The only thing they did right was eventually investing trillions of dollars into banks to stop a recession that was only occurring because of the lack of oversight into an important economic area.
Our economy is facing a moment of great challenge, but we've overcome tough challenges before, and we will overcome this one. I know that Americans sometimes get discouraged by the tone in Washington and the seemingly endless partisan struggles. Yet history has shown that in times of real trial, elected officials rise to the occasion. And together we will show the world once again what kind of country America is. a nation that tackles problems head on, where leaders come together to meet great tests, and where people of every background can work hard, develop their talents, and realize their dreams.